Welcome to Roadkill Politics, the show that explores alternative political viewpoints and searches for truth in government. Now your hosts, Al Price and Jim Ananick. Welcome to Roadkill Politics, the show that explores alternative political viewpoints and searches for truth.
Ananick?
I'm a Flint teacher and part-time instructor at U of M Flint, and I was the former ombudsman for the city of Flint from 1981 to 1987.
And what we are going to do is to look at political issues from a critical perspective with some humor and try to take alternative view as to what's available in the mainstream press. The name of the show, Roadkill Politics, has several different meanings that we have thought about in putting together this show. The first notion is that alternative interpretations of the news become roadkill in mainstream media. The examples of that are things like in the healthcare debate of a couple of years ago, single-payer healthcare systems were virtually ignored in the mainstream media, even though there were over 100 sponsors available in Congress at that time ready to sponsor a bill on single-payer. A second idea or notion of roadkill politics is that we intend to examine and expose political hypocrisy and attempt to make the hypocrisy of mainstream analysis roadkill. And the third notion of what we're going to do with roadkill is to examine, and where the idea comes from, is the middle-of-the-road notion of politics. And as I was just informed shortly before the show, the former Agriculture Secretary of the state of Texas had a phrase about middle-of-the-road politics, and I'm not going to paraphrase it exactly, but the idea is what Jim Hightower said. It was something to this effect, that the only thing you see in the middle of the road are dead armadillos and people with yellow stripes down their back, and that's pretty close to it, not exactly. With that, one of the things we're going to look at is examination of the news, particularly with local emphasis, as this is a local broadcast, and we're going to pay particular attention to media coverage with the Flint Journal as a source of some of our analysis, because one of the things we are is not particularly happy with coverage that emerges from the Journal in the so-called news arena. And Jim has some.
Yeah, basically just recently in the Journal, the January 4th, 1996 issue, the Journal, how it normally spends its time going after Art Bush for everything that he does in the office. It seems to be the new person that they want to attack. The editorial said that you needed a truth squad to kind of swing into action every time certain politicians say everything. Well, basically my personal feeling is that the Journal could never serve as that truth squad, because I've never read anything in the Journal that I thought had any truth to it. And so one of the things that we can do is try to spend some time trying to make sure we explain to people the truth, the story behind what the Journal either is trying to disguise or the Journal is trying to lead you off in a different direction. And let you know, and even have an opportunity to get back with us to give your side of what the truth is. I think I had once told Albert that in all the years that I've lived in this city, if there was any story that I knew in-depth information about, the Journal never got it right.
Well, I think that's, it could be, and it's an interesting thing to try to figure out what the relationship is between the reporting of the Journal and the actual information that's available. But it's not just the Journal, it's local media and to some extent national media as well. We're not only going to concentrate on the Journal. The Journal's going to be certainly a fertile
I'm going
source.
to just concentrate on that.
It's going to be a fertile source of information, but national media in most sense is subject to the same sort of analysis. The most recent issue of Newsweek, for example, has on the cover Hillary Clinton's picture, and it says saint or sinner about her, and it's based primarily on the allegations being put forward by Alphonse D'Amato in his Whitewater hearings, which, using Alphonse D'Amato as a source of information about ethics or truth, is ridiculous at best, but Newsweek has it on the cover. And so media has a tendency to put forward information, and people read it as though it's true. And the Flint Journal is an example that we're going to use locally where people may know some of the information themselves. But it's, I agree with your assessment. Most of the time when I've known anything about the issue, that when the Journal reports, I say, where did they get that? How did they come up with that conclusion? And there are lots of examples of how that sort of thing happens and what we're going to be focusing on as a topic.
Art, a lot of times it's just an issue of trying to, in a sense, mislead or assume that you know the background of the people that are presenting their views. And many times they have backgrounds in certain political administrations. They have specific backgrounds that would lead you to understand where that person's coming from. And basically the person may be an attack dog from one of the political parties rather than someone that's trying to provide information to you. One of the things that you know, we want to get across to you, at least I do, is to kind of, the expression in the 60s was never trust anybody over 30, and we don't want you to trust us, and you probably still can't trust anybody over 30. But what we want to do is to provide you with some information that you go and check out, you know, and don't ever come up to me and say that what we'd like to prove something, and you're going to quote a newspaper source. You might as well just tell me your brother-in-law told you. And
depending on your brother-in-law, it may be more credible than what you get out of the major media. And this is true of political analysis throughout. One of the issues that I wanted to bring up today for discussion as part of this focus on what's the major media headline for today, for about the past 6 months there's been this constant attention to the budget impasse in Washington. And the administration has been at odds with Congress about whether or not they can produce a 7-year balanced budget that, that they can agree upon. And no one has challenged the premise that Congress can do that. Not whether you can have a balanced budget, but whether or not they can guarantee that a budget 7 years from now is going to be balanced when they can't even produce a budget for this year. They're talking about 7 years from now, but they can't encumber another Congress's budget. If 2 years from now a new Congress is elected and they decide they're going to spend money differently than this Congress thinks they're going to spend money, it's not possible for the current Congress to say, well, 2 years from now you can't spend money on what you want to. Every Congress is constitutionally empowered to create its own budget and authorize its own money. Yet the major media have them as a tug of war debating whether or not they can balance the budget in 7 years without talking about what it is that they're doing with the budget and how much money they're spending.
Well, most congressmen keep their money in cash in a shoebox in the closet. So, they know that there's extra money somewhere.
Well, that was actually the case of a former senator from Georgia. He was in a divorce, and his wife said, I want part of the money that he keeps in his raincoat in the closet. And that sort of led to the end of him. The 7-year budget that they're talking about, when they haven't held a single hearing in Congress explaining what the cuts are going to be that they're making in the programs that they call entitlements. What are the cuts that are going to be in Medicare and Medicaid? What coverages aren't going to be provided anymore? And who's going to pay more when they change the allocation for what people are going to get on Medicare? They won't hold hearings on it because they don't want anybody to ask questions about it. And part of my objective in being involved in this show is to try and get people engaged in politics, because right now the only people that are actively talking to Congress are lobbyists and people carrying around, as you're suggesting, shoeboxes full of money. You have a right and an obligation to pay attention to politics because it determines an awful lot of who gets what out of what government does. And go ahead.
You know, it's just probably the only way that you're basically going to solve the problem. If you don't have a bunch of shoeboxes full of money, you know, in your closet that you can pass on to your, you know, your local politician, it's going to be very difficult to have any type of impact without going out, knocking doors, getting people to vote, getting people, for the most part, to vote for people that are not controlled by other people. And hopefully as we go along, we can kind of tell you who these people are that control your legislators and elected officials, and help you try to make better decisions. But it's crucial that you get involved. It's crucial that you just don't say, well, I believe or don't believe Al and Jim, but that you take the information, in a sense, if you don't believe it, shove it back in our face.
Yeah, and it's good. As part of that, I believe we have available, that will be put up on screen, the address for the House and for the Senate in Washington. And we've been talking about the budget impasse. One of the things that I would hope you do is write to senators and congressmen, whether they're from your district or not, or from your state, and tell them what you think about their not holding hearings on Medicare and Medicaid cuts, actually explaining what they're going to do. They don't get much mail from actual citizens. They get a lot of little cards that organizations will pass out, but they don't get real letters from people. And I think that calling or writing to your representatives, telling them to get off the dime here and hold hearings that people can understand and tell them what exactly they're getting cut. And as part of that, I think they ought to absolutely guarantee that they're not going to give any tax cuts to anybody who makes more than $150,000 a year.
Well, isn't that basically what the holdup is now, the tax cut? Not necessarily. I think they can agree on the cuts. It's basically the capital gains tax, you know. And it's important, just for example, that the richest 10% of the families in this country hold 85% of the stock, you know. And it tells you who these things are for. You need to know that type of information so you don't think that somehow, someday, you're going to find, let's say, a shoebox full of money and be able to invest in stock, and this is going to benefit you. You know, you have to understand who this benefits, and that we may not have a budget in this country because a lot of people are waiting around to give the most wealthy people in this country a huge, huge tax break, and it's not about $500 per child tax credit. It's about who's controlling our elected officials.
And I think that's something people ought to respond to, that if you're interested in this sort of information, you've got to pay attention. You've got to not just accept the apparent conflict between the House and Senate about what is the subject of this debate, but instead look at who is likely to benefit from this capital gains tax cut and what kind of impact that's going to have on the people who are receiving the cuts from the programs. It seems ludicrous to me to be telling old people that they're not going to be covered for medical care at the same time we're giving tax breaks away. Why not keep the tax breaks and cover old people for medical care? It's just silly, and nobody's asking questions. You know, people are going to get shipped off to nursing homes or not get paid for, so that the people who own stocks and bonds can speculate on Wall Street and say, well, gee, this is great for us. Wall Street's going up. Meanwhile, Grandma's going to have to live in a box out back of the house. It's just silly. But they pass it off as real debate between the parties.
And one of the things you should do is you should pay close attention to the financial networks. And those networks will help you understand basically what's happening. Because if 40,000 people are laid off from AT&T, the stock of AT&T goes up. And you need to understand that. When people lose their jobs, these stocks go up. When they talk about a good economy may mean that you don't have a job. you know, and you need to kind of start finding out about these things, not necessarily, again, trusting anyone, but taking the information and either trying to prove it or disprove it so that you can make the right decisions as you go down the line.
Yeah, you can't believe what happens when campaigns, and they're already starting, the campaigns for the next presidential race are starting now, and you can't believe campaign ads as being accurate in terms of information. You got to go out and check your own information, and and the libraries have this information, and it is available. As we go along in the program, each week we're going to provide names and addresses of federal agencies that you can write to and ask for information. We're going to tell you how the Freedom of Information Act might be used to get information from government that you have a right to know, but they aren't telling you. And there might be a reason they're not telling you. Now, another thing that we wanted to talk about for today was the current absolute fascination with the Whitewater hearings that are being carried out in the Senate. I spent a good part of the day yesterday watching the Whitewater hearings, and it was laughable. I mean, it is laughable. You got Alphonse D'Amato, who has had a number of different ethics investigations of him as an individual. In fact, there were a popular name for him was Senator Pothole because there were allegations that he was taking some sort of unethical gratuities, shall we say, from road repair when he was in New York. He's the one who's the leader of this investigation of Hillary Clinton's ethics in representing, as her law firm, Madison Guaranteed Savings and Loan in Arkansas. And yesterday in the hearings, they brought on the attorney who actually did the work on this particular item. And the total billings between Hillary Clinton as the lead attorney and her subordinate, who was a young attorney, the total billings they got from Madison Guaranteed Savings and Loan were $21,000 over an 18-month period. That's how much they billed for the work they did. In contrast, Congress, so far, has spent $30 million investigating Whitewater and Madison Guaranty. What that adds up to is that Congress has spent 1,428.5 times more money investigating the $21,000 than the actual $21,000, and nobody suggests that the legal work that they did was wrong or unethical.
But at least, Albert, we'll be able to remove Hillary from office, through these hearings.
And what this has done is open up a whole other area of attacking political wives or husbands, as the case may be. But in the past, spouses had been sort of off limit, that you didn't really attack the spouse of the elected official. It was okay to attack the elected official, but they're beating up on Hillary Clinton, and I think it's because they just don't like the idea that she actually has some strength independent of her husband.
Well, it may be legitimate. It almost, I don't think there's anything such as a sacred cow. I'm one of the people that believe that if you make the decision to go into public life, that you don't have a private life anymore. I don't buy this that public officials have a right to a private life also. If you don't, there's Truman, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. These people control your lives. They decide. It's not everything that basically happens to you. They decide if your children are going to go to war. They decide if you're going to have jobs. And for these people to hide behind some kind of secrecy and that you don't have a right to know that is something that I just don't believe in. Every single thing that's available, the public should have a right to know about these elected officials. And I think the information is kind of out there. It's how it's presented to you. If the Journal would spend as much time telling you how much money that people spend on campaigns and where that money goes to, and more important, because they may write an article that tells you that so-and-so gave $10,000 to this mayoral candidate. That's not as important as telling you what that person that gave the $10,000 to that mayoral candidate got in exchange. And every single time, rather than over and over and over again talking about the same issue of community corrections in Art Bush. I don't know what they have about Art Bush, but they spend a lot of time doing that, and not much time telling you who's buying Flint.
And who gets what out of what they bought. The same thing is true in Congress. While they're spending all this time in Congress and effort to find out what happened in the Whitewater investment 17 years ago, and they're examining why Vincent Foster killed himself, I can imagine why he killed himself. If you had a person who I think is an unethical cretin like Alphonse D'Amato on your case, that'd be worth...
Sure.
I mean, can you imagine having this guy who you believe has no ethics at all coming after you?
I mean, most of us know what the McCarthy hearings were all about. And most of us know the lives and the people that killed themselves related to these things. And that's nothing more than this is what this hearing's about. One of the things, and again, you know, as time goes on, you'll see that I'm not necessarily a great fan of the president. And I'll point out just as well as I do other people. One of the things he said the other night is that they're taking people and destroying their lives because they have to have attorneys to make sure that they don't say anything that's wrong, so that D'Amato don't come back and say, well, this is what you said over here, and this is perjury, and we're going after you, and if you don't talk, we're going to put you in jail for contempt. And these people can do this until the public says, basically, there's nothing there. The recent thing I just read about going after Hillary, because now they think that's how you get the attention off what's happening in the economy, is that she keeps her records at home. She keeps her records at home. I mean, not in this law firm, you know, she keeps them at home. Basically, I don't know about you, Albert, but I keep my records at home. I hope that doesn't create a congressional investigation.
Well, I mean, one of the things Christopher Dodd yesterday in the hearings said, Congress has got to get its priorities right. They've had dozens of hearings on Whitewater, not one hearing on what the Medicare and Medicaid cuts are going to do to the people.
Sure.
Well, what do you think's more important, finding out what happened in this investment 17 years ago, or chasing down this $21,000, or what happens to old people when they cut their benefits, or force them into an HMO where the HMO says, well, why don't we see about your condition, let it wait a little while. We're just going to wait and see on your condition. And have the financial incentive to let you die instead of treat you. It seems to me their priorities are just completely twisted.
Well, no, it's not. They can't hold those hearings because the public won't tolerate it. If you know, the public, I basically, and I think you've heard me say this before, I have a lot of faith in the public if they're given the information. The problem is very seldom do they have the information. And it's important that they get it. And I think if they held the hearings and people really knew what we were doing to our seniors, to our children, and for what, so someone can get a capital gains tax cut, so someone doesn't who sat basically watching the stock market and made a few $100,000
by laying other people off.
Sure, yeah, made 40,000 people out. Here goes, yeah, I made a few bucks, and now this takes some nice elderly lady and take her Medicare away from her. You know, because that's part of it too, if you hold a hearing. Some of these people want to get rid of Social Security. It's not about what it'll go broke or what, they want it to go broke, they want to eliminate it, and they don't have the courage to tell you that. And if you believe in these programs, you have to understand that some of them have a long history of trying to eliminate Social Security.
And that's a frightening possibility. When Gingrich inadvertently said out loud what he wanted to do with Medicare was he wanted to first let the healthy people go off it and get private insurance, and then it'll wither on the vine.
Sure.
I mean, they actually caught him on screen saying that.
Sure.
But that's what he meant all along.
And that's what should be repeated over and over again when you talk about the budget. Who controls who and what the interest is.
And who gets what out of it.
Sure.
Because poor people almost never get, they want to cut entitlements to poor people. They're not the one getting the money to begin with. Most of the budget don't end up with poor people. It ends up in the hands of people who are doing the military contracting or other...
Years ago, and most working people know this, I started opposing all tax cuts because every time there was a tax cut, it cost me more. You know, and I can go back to this was early 60s. when I first basically started noticing this, and show you that for the most part, when people talk about my taxes going down, it basically has gone up and up and up, because basically I'm a working person. And working people do not benefit from tax cuts that most of these elected officials put through, because we're not the ones that decide if they get there or not.
And when they do things that they take off the budget, things like the savings and loan scandal, which poor people didn't get anything out of, but all the people who were these high-priced crooks who stole from the savings and loans, then they took the money from the tax base and put it into savings and loan speculators, and now to make things worse, these guys are coming back and buying the failed thrifts for pennies on the dollars, and they're the ones who stole them blind to begin with. So, I mean, it's sinister if you think about it in that way, but none of that ever gets talked about. It only gets talked about because there's a budget impasse, and it's a personality conflict between Gingrich and Clinton. And you're right. I don't think we're going to end up being perceived as big fans of Bill Clinton on this, because he's been responsible for doing things Republicans couldn't have done in the past. George Bush couldn't have gotten NAFTA through. Clinton did.
Sure. And basically, if you look why and who, and Secretary of the Treasury Rubin and what his interest is, and what it's almost necessary for Clinton in order to survive and get reelected to follow these interests. Yeah.
We want to move to our last segment. Each week we're going to have what we call as our Dead Skunk in the Road Award, or what Jim wants to call it, our Stinky Award. And we're going to award that to who we think is the most egregious violator of standards of decency in American politics, or local politics. And we voted, and the two of us get to vote and decide, along with our producer. And who we came up with for our first awardee was Senator Alphonse D'Amato for our Dead Skunk in the Road Award.
He really stinks.
for an egregious waste of taxpayers' money to spend day after day. You should see the hearing room. They're just crowded with lawyers who are getting paid $150, $200 an hour to sit and watch them search through reams of paper to try and find Hillary Clinton's dirty underwear. You know, it's prurient interest.
And Judge Ito agreed with us on this award.
So that's our Dead Skunk in the Road Award, and we hope that people aren't anxious to receive this award, but we're going to be giving it out, and it won't always be to a national level politician. It may be a local official, and we'll have those too. What we want to do is to close out with thanking you for watching our show, and hope that you will check out the information.
Yeah, one of the things that we're going to try to do is put a little a light side onto this, and it's not because it's not serious, but sometimes that expression, you know, if you can laugh, it kind of stops you from crying.
Thank you.
Good night.